Hello and welcome to the pain and pleasure of living a life on purpose. Today I have with me Sonja Preston, all the way from across the ditch in Tassie. Now she has suffered 3 decades of loss and pain, but she's purposely chosen the pleasure as an antidote, particularly laughter, to get her through life and to live a fulfilling life. So hello Sonja, lovely to join you.
Hi Philippa.
So could you tell the listeners exactly what was the pain? Well, I know you had about 3 different sorts of pain that you endured and how you overcame it.
Well, in a snapshot, I found out when I was 33 that I had an older sister that I was unaware of, but that had had an influence on my life. I went through a very unpleasant divorce, and I also had breast cancer. So a lot of big issues, big things had happened to me.
Wow. Well, so just recently, perhaps you could, so what was the experience for you knowing, so there's a lot of loss there for you to actually take on board. So how did you discover about your sister?
When I was 32-ish, I grew up believing I was the eldest of 3 children to my mum and dad. My dad had passed away when I was 10, and the baby at the time was only 9 months. So we'd grown up with mum and the 3 of us girls. And mum later remarried. And when I was 32 and I was married, I think I had 2 children at that stage, she called us 3 girls together with her husband, my stepfather, and told us that before she'd met my father, and she was from Denmark, before she'd met my father, she'd had a relationship with a man in Denmark. They separated. She then found out she was pregnant, and when she tried to find him, she couldn't. And in 1952, when she gave birth to that baby, single women, their babies were automatically taken for adoption.
Really?
So she didn't get a say in it at all. She never even saw the baby. They put a screen up and, this little baby was taken away. And at the time, and Denmark's a very small town, particularly at that time, so you could live in this town and you might work 2, 3, 4 kilometres away, but the town that was 20 or 40 kilometres away, you might go there for your Christmas holidays. Right. So she was able to keep it from her family that she was pregnant. So she never told anybody. And when she left the hospital, the social workers at that time, best advice at the time was go home, go on with your life and forget you've ever had a baby.
Wow.
I know. And when mum, even now when I'm telling you, I remember mum telling us this, and it was so emotional because myself and my next sister down, we both had 2 children. We'd had babies. We know how precious they are and that connection and so forth. And to imagine not ever even seeing the baby, she knew it was a girl. I'll just jump a little bit ahead. Many years later, she when she was dying, she got me to go over to cupboard and get out this little card. And what it was the in the cots, they put a little name tag with the baby in there. It was the details of the baby, and she said, I stole that from the hospital. Aww. And that was the only proof she had this child existed. So she was telling us this story, and just funnily enough, that how we actually did connect was my mother had an older brother and a twin sister. When she gave birth and was discharged from the hospital, she went to her twin sister and said, I've just had a baby. I don't want to talk about it, and you're never to mention it again. Now, to her sister's credit, she never did. When my half-sister, her name's Hella, when she always knew she was adopted at age 4 months by an older couple who couldn't have children, and they just adopted her. So she always grew up knowing she was adopted, and also felt she would never look for her natural parents till her adoptive parents died. So when she tried to track down mum, because my mother had moved from Denmark, there were no records of her in Denmark, birth or death. Obviously birth, death or marriage there. So it was a dead trail. But when Hella, she always knew mum's name from the birth certificate. When she found Mum's birth certificate, she found out that she was actually a twin. And she was able to track our auntie down, who was the only other person Mum had told about this.
Wow. And was she in Denmark?
She was still in Denmark, and my sister Hella lives in Denmark. So she tracked down the auntie, who then was in a dilemma because our mother, had said, I don't want you to ever mention it again. And she actually had counselling for 6 months with her priest, who said, you have to tell your sister that Hella's made contact. She made that decision, I think, 37 years ago. You have to offer her the opportunity. If she says no, that's it. But, of course, Mum was delighted. And, you know, that's when she told us. And it wasn't at that time, but in my life up until then, you know, as children, we'd had the trauma of Dad dying when I was not quite 10. So it was very traumatic. We'd had, you know, growing up with a single mum. And at that time, it's like drama on drama, or, stuff on top of it, was that at that time in Australia, so Mum and Dad were living in Australia, and at that time, if you weren't an Australian citizen, you couldn't claim the widow's pension. So Mum was an Australian resident, married to an Australian, but she couldn't claim the pension because she wasn't an Australian.
Wow. Yep.
So, and actually legislation was before Parliament at that time, but it took 6 months. So for 6 months, not only had she lost her husband and living in a foreign country, but we had literally no income for 6 months. And so we lived on food and money and clothing and stuff from the charity organisations. And Mum started going out cleaning and house cleaning and so forth. But, I mean, you know, she had a 9-month-old baby to take along to that.
Wow.
So, that was a tough time. But it was interesting, even though it was really sad and it was painful and, you know, all the normal things for a child to lose a parent, I always felt surrounded by Mum's love. So we didn't have a lot, but I always felt loved. And I think my mother was a very loving person anyhow, and very loved children and so forth. And I don't know if that was because, like, that sort of persona that she had, I don't know if she was like that before she had to give up Hella for adoption, or if it was a result of that she felt, you know, children are so important, so precious, you need to love them all the time, you know.
What was her mother like?
Because she lived in Denmark and we were in Australia, I only met her 2 or maybe 3 times. She was the old-fashioned picture of a lot of European women you see who wore sort of black dress with a white apron and very big bosoms, you know, a really heavy, big-breasted woman who, when she cuddled me I think I was 5 or 6 when we went there the first time, you know, you were enveloped in the hug, you know, you just buried in boobs, yeah. She was beautiful, yeah.
Oh, so have you met Hella?
Yes. And so that's what I was going to say.
Before your mother passed?
Yes, we were all connected. That's what I was going to say. It was really interesting that in my growing up years, I always felt something was missing. And I'm guessing this may have had something to do with Dad going and, you know, as a child losing parent, you don't really, you know, 10-year-old or almost 10-year-old, you don't really understand death at all.
Mm.
But in my growing up years, I always felt something was missing. And I thought it was Dad, but then I thought, no, I don't know if it's that. When I was married, I was happy, but I didn't feel enough. No, not within me, but something wasn't there. And then it's like when I'd eat food, I think this is beautiful, but I was teaching. I love teaching, but. So there was always something, as if something was missing. And, you know, I didn't have any idea what it was, and I thought, well, maybe this is just me. This is how I feel. And interestingly, not when I found out about Hella, but when I actually met her for the first time, which was several years after we first heard about each other and were writing letters and the very odd phone call, because, you know, this is very expensive 25 years ago or whatever it is. When I met her the first time, and we met in Denmark at an auntie's house, and Hella was there with her family. And I remember when I saw her, and of course we hugged and we cried and all that, and at some stage in that afternoon, I was sitting here, she was sitting across the room. I don't know if she was talking to her husband or the children or something. But I felt like, and this is really emotional, I felt like she took a piece of her heart and put it in me, and it was like a missing piece of my jigsaw puzzle that I suddenly felt complete. And I would have never, ever guessed that it was a sister that was missing in my life, because I would have never guessed my mother could give up a child. But in fact, she didn't give it up, it was taken. But it was like, that's what was missing, you know.
Well, you can't rationalise, and it's so hard to put into words. You can't rationalise something. Your soul just knows, doesn't it? And as you say, it's that one moment that to feel whole and really a piece of something that you didn't know was missing, and that you didn't know that would mean quite so much to you, and how important people are, and just not to miss the feelings.
And just the fact that, how did I know something was missing? Because she was gone before I was born, before I was conceived. So, it makes you recognise transgenerational trauma. Somehow the seeds of mum's despair were carried through genetically to me, that I knew something was missing without having the picture or the story.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was that's a lovely completion to that story. So then we move on to the marriage. I mean, disclose as much or as little as you want. It's just another process of loss.
Yeah. So I met him when we were in high school. I at that time I was very insecure. I was not confident. Like a lot of teenagers, you don't think you're pretty, you don't think you're good enough. A lot of normal teenage stuff, which isn't good, but it is there. And so when he showed interest in me, I was actually quite surprised and quite flattered, because he likes me, But anyway, we connected, we got married, 3 children. I was happy in the relationship. I had nothing to compare it to know, well, that's what it should be like, or that's what it could be like. I was happy with where we were. We did it tough, in the sense we left Sydney and we moved to the country and started building a mud brick house, which was wonderful ultimately, but it took 7 years. And because we did it ourselves, and we were living in a caravan at a stage. We were living in an old, literally a shack that when it rained, the rain would come through, and we never had any money. My ex was a man who, he's very clever. He has a lot of amazing ideas, but doesn't always have the ability to carry it through because he wants to do it all himself. And so we often had money troubles because the business just needed more and more to be ploughed into it. And he put a lot of time in it. Anyway, so, but I felt, or he kept saying to me that, he didn't feel good, that he didn't understand himself, that, it was always the definition of himself. And then he just announced, just around the time we were both turning 40-ish, that he was going to leave. And I actually didn't even see it coming. I can look back now and see there were lots of signs, but at the time it was a real surprise to me.
Well, you're caught up in surviving yourself, with all the conditions that are around you and small children, it's very easy to lose track of yourself as well, so you don't see the signs. Automatic pilots.
Well, definitely, and particularly with young children and pregnancy and breastfeeding. And then I was doing casual teaching, and we were still building this house, so there was always bits and pieces to do there, and life. And when it went through and everything, he took a separation, he said, with the idea to see if he wanted to come back or not. And I look back now and think, why was I waiting for him to make that decision? Why didn't I say, you're either here now, buddy boy, or you're not? But at that time I didn't have the power I did have the power. I didn't touch into it. But interestingly enough, a few months later, when it was obvious he wasn't coming back and a divorce would need to happen, all of a sudden I thought, I'm not letting you divorce me. I'm going to do it. So I jumped in and made the paperwork because I felt like I'd lost control in so many ways, or I'd given my power away in the relationship without even realising that's what I was doing. And this was that fire, that spirit that I think we all have in us, but we don't always know it's there and we don't know how to tap into it. And suddenly I thought, no, I'm going to do that.
It's only when we're really pissed off or in a corner that we actually...
Yes, absolutely. And, yeah, I was surprised because it was like, where did this come from? Because this is Sonja, who's not very strong and not very vocal and not very powerful. But I think in our relationship, and I don't blame him for this, it's who we both were. He played the one who took all the decisions, and I played the one who defaulted to the decisions.
Yeah.
And he wasn't nasty or a bully or anything like that. He's very clever with words, but he'd always say to me, so what do you think about this? But it wasn't until afterwards I realised, but we always did what he wanted. Even though he'd been ostensibly including me, he was the one who always decided we'd do this.
Yeah.
And that decision for me to take the divorce, even it's the last thing in the world I wanted, it gave me the connection to my power again. And that was a really good thing. So I grieved heavily over that. I actually wanted to die. I thought about how I would kill myself. But I thought, I can't leave my kids. And so that thought was gone very quickly. The children were from 8 to 14 at that age, so still very young. So, you know, that rage that I felt, I was caught up in a vortex of sadness, grief, anger, hate. I was surprised at how much I could hate somebody, how much I wanted him to die because I was in pain, you know. And at the same time, I would never do anything to make that happen. But just the intensity of emotions when something like that happens, it's very overwhelming and quite scary.
And did you get any help through this? Because, I mean, one of the big things for me is being aware of our emotions and actually allowing it. You know, when you're talking about hate, it was a part of it, using my degree in psychology, is obviously a hate of yourself for allowing yourself to be in that. So it's actually a projection about the way we've allowed others to treat us and not empower ourselves. But it's so important to acknowledge those, not to push them down, because they're part of the grieving process to grow and basically to get rid of it so that we come out thriving.
Yeah, yes. And I thought about seeing a counsellor, and I did, to find out how to help the children.
Yeah.
But I mean, I did have a circle of good girlfriends, except for the one who was actually having an affair with my husband.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but I didn't know that at the time. But these other circle girls, they were the ones, you know, you could go and hang with, you could talk with and stuff. But over time I could feel they were becoming less interested in all my weeping and wailing. And I remember going home at night and, you know, I had these good friends. I had family who lived a long way away but who were supportive, and thinking, I've got all this support around me, but I still have to go to bed alone every night. And I didn't mean alone without him. I meant alone.
Yeah.
And at that age of 40, it was the first time, it sounds dorky now to not have noticed, but it was the first time I really recognised that in life we are alone.
Yeah.
Have all these other people around you that you connect with, and that can be a beautiful thing. But really, there's just you.
And it's up to us to find our own happiness. It's not outside ourselves, it's inside.
Yeah. So, and the other reason I didn't seek a counsellor was because I'd had these thoughts, you know, and they were seriously only intermittent, but of, oh, I wanted to die. I was scared if I vocalised that to somebody, that they would then inform child protection that my children were at risk. And I wasn't going to have that. So I kept that to myself. And obviously nothing happened. And I never got to a point where I was standing there with a knife or drugs or anything like that. It was never got that far. but it was that thought, this is so painful, I don't want to be dealing with it. I don't want to be.
Particularly, I'm just thinking back to your mother's story, you know, whether the external authorities came in and took a child away, she had no choice of it. So subconsciously, that would have had a huge impact on where you were.
I never even thought of it till you just said then, but it certainly wasn't a conscious thought, but but it's more that my kids, I felt, they may not have felt the same way, but I felt they'd lost their father. They'd lost their family home connection thing. The last thing they need is to lose me as well.
Yeah.
Now, they really hadn't lost their father, but that's what it felt like at the time.
Absolutely, absolutely. So that's that decade over and done with. Well, kind of. And so into your 50th decade, what happened then?
I was working in Sydney with the education department, doing a job I loved, and I sort of thought, that time I'd probably work for 10, 12 years more. And I thought, I don't know if I want to do the same job for that length of time. And maybe I'll do something different. So I arranged to sell my house, and I spoke to my stepfather. My mother had passed away by that time. If I sell my house, can I move in with you, keep my job while I work out the next step in this big plan? Yeah, that's fine. So I sold the house, and in the moving process, 3 days before I had to be out, I found out I had breast cancer.
Wow.
And interestingly, I found the lump in my breast myself. Interestingly, I straight away know, for me, and I don't care what the medical model is, but for me, I knew what it was about, because this little lump was down on the underside of my breast, right near, close to my heart. And I knew that it was anger, sadness, grief. And I initially thought it might be about the loss of my marriage, which probably would have been 20 years earlier, but I've not connected with anybody else, and I thought, maybe it's about that. But I also, and I haven't mentioned this previously, I also have a sister who's disconnected from me and from others in the family. And I couldn't understand that. And I was very angry about it. I was very sad. I spent a long time obsessing with it. If I wasn't asleep or working, I would be thinking about this situation. And extreme emotion in it. Very different from the divorce where there was hate in there as well. This wasn't about hate. This was about why, understanding, love, sadness, disappointment. And I just knew straight away that this lump was emotional turmoil sort of thing. And I actually said to the breast surgeon, I said, I know you won't necessarily agree with this, or I don't care if you believe this, but I see that I have this ball of sadness and anger in my breast. You're going to physically remove it.
Yeah.
And I have to emotionally remove it.
Yeah.
And to her credit, she was just beautiful. She said, okay. She didn't argue. She didn't rationalise. She didn't explain, well, cancer grows because of these cells or anything. She was just gorgeous.
Yeah.
And so I ended up having 20 months of treatment, a couple of surgeries, radiation and so forth. And I really, whenever this sister popped into my mind, I would have to let go of it because it was out of my control. There was nothing I could do about the disconnection. I had tried multiple times to reconnect, to talk about it, and she wasn't interested. And that's fine. That's her choice. But I had to let go of that emotional turmoil because it wasn't helping me and my body and my life.
Yeah. And I so agree with you. And it's lovely to hear that someone intuitively tapped into what it was, because particularly when you hear your whole story, it has been a series of loss and heartache. And so it actually helps to create the vision of how much the body holds on to stuff. You know, if you think about the number of years that you went through and how, you know, subconsciously it goes through generations, that loss sort of thing, and how important it is. So when you get to the end, what was your journey then? Because you talked of sadness, anger and things like that. I guess there was a certain amount of despair. Was there a turning point for you?
With the cancer, you mean?
Yeah.
This is going to sound really weird, but there's actually an adrenaline rush. I think when you're, you know, the flight and fight response. So when you're in a scary, difficult, shocking situation, you know, you get this rush of adrenaline to allow you to do something. And that adrenaline, I don't know if this is true in a medical thing, but for me, that adrenaline is also a little bit exciting because you've got this elevated status. It's like when you're on a roller coaster and you're climbing up the top, and you know there's going to be this rush going down, and it's scary and exciting all at once. And I don't mean exciting in a good way with the cancer, but I guess by that stage I was thinking maybe life is a series of little episodes or journeys, and this is another journey. And I don't mean I was excited looking forward to it, but it was like, I wonder what this means. And I don't know if that's it.
Was it empowering? It obviously gave you the strength to keep going, but empowering that, did you feel in control at any stage?
It wasn't empowering until I took control.
And when
so I very quickly in the beginning realised that when I spoke to the oncologist about what was going to happen, that there was this whole swag of new language I had to learn about the drugs and the treatment and different titles and stuff. And she wrote out on a piece of paper for me, right, you're going to have this surgery, you'll see this person. Then you'll come back to me and I'll work out the schedule. And, oh, no, she'd already done the schedule. Then you'll have these doses of these drugs, and then you'll do this. And then, so, you know, she had a timetable sort of thing of events that would happen in this journey. And she said, well, it'll probably take, you know, a good 6 months. In fact, it was much longer than that, but the intense period was probably 6 months. And I was still working for the education department at that time. And I realised that, you know, I'm always write it in my diary sort of person. And I'd be writing down, okay, blood tests this day, surgery this day, doctor's appointment this day. And it became just this intense diarying of appointments. And for me, at that point in time, I guess I've always been a write it in your diary, tick it off sort of list person. There was an element of control in that. So I felt a little bit, the analogy I've used is a bit like a supervisor in a building site, like this is what's going to happen and you're organising all the components. And that's when I took control too, in the sense that I knew I had moved a lot around, and I had family and friends around the world who I know loved me, who would want to know, who would want to be there to help me even from afar. But I could not cope with talking to them all individually. It was just, in the first 3 weeks, I could not say the word cancer loud. If I had to tell somebody, it was, I've got, you know, I'd whisper it, I'd mouth it. Because I think in those first 3 weeks, I was sort of thinking, well, maybe if I don't say it, it won't be true. You know, that was the initial thing. Then you know it's true. Then I take control. So I wrote an email to all these people and said, I've just found out this. It's suggested I'll need surgery. I may need chemo and radio depending on the results. I'm having surgery on this day, that sort of thing. And even in that first letter, I look back now and I'm quite astonished I had the foresight or the whatever to pull it together. But I said, this is how you can help me. You can send me funny jokes. You can send me messages, text messages to say you're thinking of me. And I said, you know, I might not respond, but I'll love to read them. Emails. If you live close by, come and give me a hug. If you live close by, cook me meals. So I was already, again, like a building supervisor, directing people. And interestingly enough, I think I sent out 80, and within 48 hours I had 68 replies. It was just astonishing, and I felt surrounded by love. And I took that to another step. So when I was having the first surgery, when I actually had the date, I wrote to them again and told them. And I said, look, I have a belief that the colour of love is pink. And I said, I need you to all do me a favour, and on the surgery date, and it's quite funny, the surgery date was actually initially set down for April Fool's Day, which I thought was hilarious. It ended up changing, but that was the first due date. And I said, what you can do for me is wear pink on the day. So I had people all around the world wearing pink in some shape or form. And again, I felt like, you know, they were cradling me in their hands and surrounding me with love. And, you know, the message was, I want your love, but I also want the surgeon, when she cuts me open, to see love all around me and in me. And it was so beautiful. And even at that time, my uncle down in Tasmania was, I think he was 88 or something like that, 89. He wore pink underpants that day, which I'm sure ones probably that were white that his wife had washed. But it didn't matter.
Photograph of it.
I thought it was hilarious that he would do that for me, because he was very, you know, non-girly boy, you know. So, yeah. So that was really nice to have it. And I had lots of people. I just continued to write those emails to keep people up to date. And a lot of people have said they were really helpful for them, because, you know, unless you know somebody personally who goes through cancer, you just don't really understand what they go through.
It's a two-way street. You know, you've actually opened it up to help others. It's like when somebody dies, unless you had experienced it yourself, you don't know how to help them, and so you don't say anything. And by doing what you're doing, it was really saying, well, this will help me, and it really helped them as well. It's that give and take sort of thing, isn't it? It's amazing in the journey. Yeah. So at what point did things turn around for you once you'd been through the chemo? Was there a point you can remember, oh, I can control my life now, and I am who I am?
Well, there was a really hard point where I'd had the surgery, and I'd started the chemo, and I knew I would lose my hair, but you don't sort of know when it's going to happen. And then, you know, in fact, your head starts to get really itchy. I've been told it's the nerve cells dying. And you're just scratching like this and brushing your scalp because it's so itchy. And from when I first started to lose it to when it was gone was 3 days. So it's very rapid. Yeah. And I remember the morning when I stepped out of the shower and the last little wisps of hair had washed away in the shower. And, of course, you step out of the shower naked. And, of course, why, I don't know, but there's always a big mirror when you step out of the shower and you're standing there naked. But anyway, so I'm standing there and I can see the scars on my breast and part of the breast missing, and also under the arm I had a scar. And I've now got no hair. And you look, for the first time ever, you look sick because, you know, you're devoid of hair, which doesn't make sense, but that's what, you know, feels like. And I cried, and I actually got dressed and I rang up my son because I just needed to talk to somebody. And Luke was just beautiful, because when he answered the phone, of course, he could see it was me. And I just started sobbing, and I'm not a sobber. I'm a crier, but not a sobber. And I was sobbing. And he said, Mum, you cry as long as you need. I'm here. And he just stood there and let me cry for probably 5 minutes before we then talked. And that was a really low point, because up until then, you know, the cancer didn't physically hurt. I didn't have pain from it. I didn't look sick in any shape or form. But suddenly at that point in time, to my definition, I looked sick. And then it was, whether it was that day or the next day, I can't quite remember, but very quickly after that, I just realised, hang on, you can cut bits of my boob off. You can fill me up with horrendous drugs. And I knew I was having radiation. You can zap me. You can take away my hair. I am still me.
Yeah.
And that was such an empowering moment, because I guess I'd never been in a situation I'd had to think about that before. But realising that you're more than just your body. Your body is the external vessel. And I don't mean that in a hippie spiritual sort of way, but the reality is people function very well when they've, well, maybe not as well as if they had 2 legs or 2 arms, but you can still function very well with parts of you missing.
Yeah.
Because the essence of who you are isn't your body. It's what's either in your heart, your soul, your spirit, your brain, your psyche, I don't know what you call it. But the you is not the body.
Exactly. So, so what have you, I know you've since gone over a huge milestone for you, having now gone into your 60th year, which is fantastic. And you've managed to achieve something quite amazing. Would you like to share?
Yeah, have just completed a month ago walking part of the Camino Trail in Spain. It was originally a Catholic pilgrimage, and I'm not religious at all. But when I first heard about it 8 years ago, I thought, I'm going to do that one day. It just sounded really appealing. It's a walk through Spain. And I did it with a girlfriend from school, and we both had backpacks on, which we carried the whole time, 8 kilos. And we walked 320 kilometres. Yeah. And it was a most beautiful thing to just walk. So I've always loved connecting with nature, being around the bush, the forest, the beach, anything like that. And I don't even have to be active in it. I just have to be there. And, you know, it's lovely to be, I guess, grounded and surrounded by nature. So that's always been appealing. So we got lots of that, but also the connection, again, to yourself. So the last 5 years of my life have been quite busy with activity after the cancer, and setting up my own business and working and moving it to another state. And I've loved everything I've done, and a lot of my work entails giving to other people. And I love doing that. It was so nice on the Camino Trail to give to me. So I didn't have to think about helping this person or doing that thing or going to support this person. It was all, oh, this is all about me. And it's really quite nice.
Well, it's actually, for me, it's a huge thing that as women we find particularly hard, is to fill up our own tank, because we keep that full. It's so much easier. We are natural givers, but we do need to fill up our tank. And the other thing is actually to receive it. And for me, you know, as you were saying, going into nature, I mean, I've gone to the extreme of going to the Antarctic, and the purity of the Antarctic, but even on the sub-Antarctic islands coming back again, so with the trees, it's so, you can't explain it. There is that connection, because we are source. It's all energy. We're energy, and actually it's re-energizing, because you take away all that busyness. As you say, you know, you gave yourself the gift of time away to reconnect to yourself, and nature was the thing that actually helped to heal you. So it's just amazing, and it just goes to show that there is so much learned in the pain that we go through, and you've obviously endured your fair share of decades to get to where you are now. So here's to an amazing 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s and 100s for you.
Thank you.
So what advice would you give your childhood self if you could, she was in front of you now?
To believe that you can do anything you want to, and not just believe it, but actually take the steps to do it. Because it's one thing to say, oh, I can do this, but actually take the steps and make it happen and start on that journey of whatever the thing is.
However small, and those little steps, like, you know, going to the mountain, you need to take all those steps to get to the top.
Yes.
Even if it's doing the research for, you know, going on the Camino Trail, or picking up the phone, or the training you go through, and acknowledge it. For me, a big part is acknowledging those little steps you've done, because you're one step closer.
Yeah, definitely.
Fantastic. Well, it's been an absolute delight to talk to you today, Sonja. Thank you so much for your time and your inspiration. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Philippa. It was lovely.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.